The blade came down hard on the fence post, and Eli Weston barely had time to throw himself sideways before the axe buried itself 2 inches from his boot. He looked up from the mud and found himself staring at the most terrifying and astonishing woman he had ever seen in his 26 years of living. She was enormous, not in the way that made a man feel small by accident, but in the way that made the entire timber yard seem to shrink around her. She stood a full head taller than him, green-skinned and powerfully built, with tusks that curved up from her lower jaw like polished ivory. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe braid wound through with a leather cord, and her eyes, gold as mountain amber, fierce as a hawk circling carrion, were fixed on him with an expression that suggested she had not yet decided whether he deserved an explanation or a second swing. She wore form-fitting travel leathers the color of pine shadow, a close-stitched jerkin that laced at the front and hugged every line of her powerful frame, paired with fitted riding trousers tucked into knee-high boots with iron buckles. A short cloak hung from one shoulder. The leather was work-worn but well-kept, tooled along the collar with faint geometric marks Eli did not recognize. Everything about the outfit was precise, functional, and unmistakably hers, as though the clothes had been shaped around her rather than her forced into them. "You are in my way," she said. Her voice was low, textured, carrying the faint accent of the northern mountain clans, each word bitten off cleanly. Eli got to his feet with what dignity the mud allowed, which was not much. He brushed his hands on his work trousers and looked at the axe still quivering in the post. "Your way to where, exactly?" "The stables," he blinked. He was the stablehand. The only stablehand at Caro Camp, which was the largest timber and ore operation in the Gracebine Mountains, where roughly 300 men spent their days felling trees, blasting shafts, hauling stone, and generally making enough noise to drive the local wildlife into permanent exile. He had been the stablehand here for 2 years, and in that time, no one had ever tried to axe-plant their way to his place of work. "I run the stables," he said. "I know." She pulled the axe free without effort, the wood giving a sharp cry of protest. "Joran Dast sent me. He says you are to take my horse and see to it." Eli had heard of Joran Dast. Most people in the mountain camps had. He was the new camp overseer, brought in from the southern lowlands 3 months ago with a reputation for efficiency, and a rumored hatred of anything that made the workforce anything other than perfectly uniform. That rumor had gained weight since his arrival, manifesting in small, uncomfortable ways. A half-blood iron worker quietly dismissed, a goblin trader turned away at the supply gate, a list posted to the notice board outside the foreman's office that Eli had looked at once and then made a point of never looking at again. "He sent you to me," Eli said slowly. "He told me the stable hand would see to my horse. Then he pointed at you." Her gold eyes were steady. "Are you going to see to my horse or not?" "Yes," Eli said. "Of course. What's the horse's name?" Something shifted in her expression, too quick to read. "Keth. And yours?" The pause was longer this time. "Sharamph," she said. "Sharamph Doomhammer." He extended his hand. "Eli Weston." She looked at his hand for a moment in the flat, measuring way she might look at a weapon she had not yet decided was worth picking up. Then she shook it. Her grip was iron and heat, her palm rough with work calluses, and the shake was quick and decisive. She let go first. "Where is Keth?" he asked. "Tied at the main gate. They would not let me bring him inside." Eli picked up the pitchfork he had dropped when the axe nearly took his foot, set it against the fence, and walked toward the main gate of the camp. She fell into step beside him, which put the top of his head roughly level with her jaw. He was not a short man, broad-shouldered, lean from outdoor work, with hands that had handled more difficult horses than most people would believe. But besides Sharamph Doomhammer, he was simply average in the way that made the difference between them feel like weather. Not threatening, just real. Keth turned out to be a gray mountain stallion with a scar across his nose and eyes like banked coals. He was tied to the gate post, and both gate guards were standing on the far side of the post, pointedly not making eye contact with the horse or the woman who owned him. Eli walked straight up to Keth, put a hand on the stallion's nose without hesitation, and waited. Keth pulled his head back, nostrils flaring, then blew a long breath over Eli's knuckles and went still. Behind him, he heard something he could not quite name, a sound like a word half started and swallowed. He glanced back. Sharamph was watching him with an expression that was no longer flat. It was not soft exactly, but it was open in a way her face had not been 30 seconds ago. "He does not do that," she said. "He just decided he wanted to," Eli said. He ran his hand up the stallion's nose to his forehead between the eyes. "Come on, Keth. Let's find you something decent to eat." The camp at Caro was built into the southern face of the Grayspine Range, tucked into a long valley where a timber river ran fast and cold, and the ore seams cut through the mountain like dark veins. The main structures were heavy log buildings with stone foundations and iron-banded doors built to handle winters that could lock the valley in for months. The stables were the best-maintained building in the entire camp, which was Eli's quiet pride and the source of low-level resentment from approximately half the workforce, who felt their own bunkhouses did not warrant the same level of upkeep. He gave Keth a good stall with clean straw and a bucket of grain mixed with mountain herbs he kept for horses that had traveled hard. Then he checked the stallion's hooves, ran his hands along the legs checking for heat, and found a small stone lodged at the edge of the left forefrog that he picked out with careful fingers, while the horse stood with admirable patience. Sharamph watched all of this from the stall door, arms folded, in a silence that was not hostile so much as rigorous. She was cataloging him, he realized, the way a woman who had spent a long time not trusting people cataloged those who might become exceptions. "What are you here for?" he asked, working the stone loose. "The camp, I mean." "Work," she said. "What kind?" "I am a tracker. Dast hired me to find where the eastern seam connects to the main shaft. There are fissures in the mountain they have not mapped. Men are dying in shaft 3. A pause. "Were dying before I was hired." "You mapped it." "I gave them the correct route 2 days ago. Now they want me to stay through the spring survey, make sure the western face is stable." Eli set the stone on the stall rail and straightened. "That's skilled work." "Yes," she said without vanity, the way someone states the height of a mountain. It simply was. "Are you going to tell me the problem?" He looked at her. "What problem?" "The list," she said. "On the notice board, I have seen it." His hands went still on Keth's shoulder. The list on Dast's notice board had gone up 6 weeks ago. It was framed in official language, the kind that sounded measured and reasonable, and made the bile rise in Eli's throat every time he walked past it. It was titled Workforce Composition Standards. In practice, it was a record of everyone in the camp who was not human, categorized by their perceived degree of usefulness, and the degree to which their presence was considered a potential disruption to camp operations. The word purge had not appeared on the list, but the implication sat in every line like smoke in a sealed room. Half-bloods had already started leaving. 3 had quit voluntarily in the past month. 2 more had been dismissed on invented grounds of performance. Eli had watched it happening and had done nothing, which was a failing he turned over in his mind at night with the slow, grinding persistence of a millstone. "It is not my list," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you know what it means." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then you understand that Joran Dast hired me before that list went up, before he had to look at what I was instead of what my survey results said. What does he say now that he's looked?" Her jaw tightened. "He says he keeps his contracts, but he put me in the tool shed to sleep." The words landed in the air between them and sat there. Eli thought about the tool shed. It was 40 paces from the stables, a low structure with gaps in the wall boards where the mountain wind came through in streams cold enough to take the skin off. In March, at this elevation, the nights did not dip below freezing. They fell through it hard and fast down to temperatures that could kill a man who was careless. "That's not acceptable," he said. "I am aware." "I mean I won't let you sleep there." The gold eyes fixed on him. "You will not let me." "I'm offering you the loft above the stables," he said. "It's warm. There is a stove up there. I sleep down here with the horses so you'd have it to yourself." Keth would be right below you. He paused. But it's your choice. She studied him for what felt like a long time. Why? Because sleeping in a tool shed in March will kill you. I will not die of cold, she said flatly. Maybe not, he said. But you'll be cold and miserable, and you don't have to be. He shrugged one shoulder. And nobody deserves a tool shed. Another one of those quick expressions he could not quite read moved across her face. Then she looked away, checking Keth's water bucket, which was full and did not need checking. I will sleep in the loft, she said to the bucket. The loft was not elegant, but it was warm. Eli had patched the walls 2 winters ago, installed a small iron stove the previous autumn on the reasoning that warm hands worked better in cold weather, and furnished it with a rope bed, a wool blanket, and a hook for lanterns. Sharamph fit under the roof beam with about an inch to spare if she stood straight. She did not comment on this. She unpacked her saddlebag with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything. A bedroll of her own, a small wrapped bundle of personal items, a leather survey case fat with folded maps and charcoal sticks, and a curved short sword in a worn scabbard that she hung on the wall peg without drama, the way other people hung a coat. Eli lit the stove for her, showed her where the water barrel was, and left her to it. He went back down to the horses and listened to the sounds of her moving overhead, deliberate, unhurried footsteps crossing the boards, the small thud of the survey case being set down, the creak of the rope bed as she sat on it. Then quiet. He leaned against the wall of Keth's stall and looked up at the ceiling. He had lived alone in the stables for 2 years. The horses did not talk back, which he had always appreciated, but the sounds from the loft were not unwelcome. That was interesting, he thought. That was something he would have to pay attention to. The first week settled into a rhythm that felt, to Eli, dangerously comfortable. He was up before dawn every day to feed and water the animals, 6 draft horses for the timber wagons, 3 mules, Keth, and a bad-tempered pony named Gravel that belonged to the camp medic. Sharamph would come down from the loft as he was finishing, already dressed, survey case under her arm, and she would stop to look in on Keth before she went out to the mountain face. They did not talk much in those early mornings. Eli had found, over years of working with horses, that silence was not always the absence of communication. Some mornings she simply stood at Keth's stall while the stallion pushed his nose against her chest, and she let him, one hand moving along his neck in a slow stroke that had nothing professional about it. Those were the mornings Eli felt most like looking away, not because the sight was wrong, but because it was so private it seemed like the sort of thing a person ought to earn the right to see. She came back at midday to eat, never in the main hall with the loggers and miners, but at the small bench outside the stables where Eli usually took his own meals. He had not invited her to join him. She had simply appeared there one day, sitting with a bowl of camp stew and a piece of flatbread, and eaten without comment, and it had remained their unspoken arrangement from then on. The camp watched. This was something Eli was quietly aware of from the second day onward. The loggers and miners were not a hostile crowd by nature. They were working men who had come to the mountains for wages and gone about their business, with the focused indifference of people who had better things to worry about than their neighbors' choices. But Dast's list had done something to the air in the camp, a slow contamination of the kind that makes ordinary people start seeing difference as threat before they have time to examine why. 2 men from the eastern bunk gave Eli flat looks when they saw him sharing his lunch bench with Sharamph. He held their gaze until they looked away first. That was the first day. On the 4th day, a heavy-set logger named Corvin blocked the path between the main hall and the stables as Eli and Sharamph were walking back from the supply store. "Word is you're keeping the greenskin in your loft," Corvin said, not to Eli but to the air between them in the way of a man performing for an audience. There were 6 men behind Corvin. There were about 14 more within earshot who had stopped what they were doing to watch. Eli stopped walking. He was not a fighting man by any particular talent. though he had been in enough rough situations to know how to stand when he needed to. He positioned himself at Sharamph's left side and slightly forward, not in front of her, she was not behind him, and he had no illusions about who between them was the more physically formidable, but at her side, which was different. "She's a guest of the camp," Eli said, "contracted by Dast. You want to take that up with him, the office is right behind you." The list says a lot of things," Eli said. "The contract she signed says different." He paused. "And the list isn't law. It's a piece of paper." Corvin's jaw worked. He was looking at Eli the way men look at someone they have underestimated and are now recalibrating. Then his eyes moved to Sharamph. Sharamph had not moved. She had not said a word. She was simply standing there with the survey case under her arm and her gold eyes fixed on Corvin with an expression of such total, indifferent calm that it was, Eli thought, significantly more threatening than anything she could have done with the short sword at her hip. Corvin stepped aside. Not graciously and not with any warmth, but he stepped aside. They walked past him and kept walking. When they rounded the corner of the stable building, Sharamph looked at him, not the cataloging look from before, something more direct. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know. He is bigger than you." "Yes." And there were 6 of them. 7, counting the one by the water trough who was pretending to check the pump, Eli said. "I noticed him. He pushed open the stable door. You want some coffee? I've got a small pot on the burner." There was a pause behind him, long enough that he wondered if he had said something wrong. Then he heard her follow him in, her boots quiet on the stable floor. "Yes," she said. "I want coffee." Joran Dast called Eli to his office on a gray Wednesday morning in the second week of Sharamph's stay at the camp. The office was a rectangular log room at the back of the main hall, smelling of pine resin and old paper. Dast was a lean man in his mid-40s with careful eyes and the particular kind of stillness that Eli associated with men who made their decisions a long time before the conversation started. "Close the door," Dast said, without looking up from his papers. Eli closed it. "You are aware," Dast said, "of the new workforce composition parameters." "I've seen the list." "Then you understand that the current arrangement is inconsistent with camp standards." "She has a contract," Eli said. "Which I honor." Dast's pen moved across the paper. "However, the terms of that contract do not include accommodation in the camp stables. Miss Doomhammer was provided with appropriate facilities." "The tool shed has gap boards," Eli said. "It was 3 degrees below last night." "Then perhaps she should complete her survey work on an expedited timeline." Dast set down the pen. He looked at Eli now the way a man looks at something he is deciding whether to remove. "You are a stablehand, Weston, a good one. I have no complaint with your work, but the social decisions of this camp are not yours to make." "I'm not making social decisions," Eli said. "I offered a woman a warm place to sleep because she was going to freeze. Do not make this more complicated than it is." Dast's voice was quiet and even. "The arrangement ends tonight. She returns to the allocated facility or she leaves the camp. Those are the options." He picked up the pen again. "You may go." Eli stood in front of the desk for a moment longer than was comfortable. He was thinking about the list. He was thinking about the 3 half-bloods who had already left. He was thinking about Sharamph's face when she said nobody had told her about the list change before she arrived. He was thinking about the fact that she had done work that saved lives in Shaft 3, and she was being told she could sleep in a building with gap walls or get out. He thought about all of this, and he did not leave the desk. "The survey is not finished," he said. "You told me yourself last week that the Western face mapping is 2 months out at minimum. You fire her or freeze her out now, and you've got an unstable survey and a contract dispute to handle." He paused. "Unless the work doesn't matter to you as much as the list." Dast's pen stopped moving. "I am doing you a courtesy," Eli continued, "by pointing that out before someone asks publicly why the work stopped and you have to explain the reason." The silence stretched. "She stays through the survey," Dast said finally. "In the stables. When the survey is done, the arrangement concludes." He did not look up from the paper again. "That is all." Eli left. He told Sharamph that evening, sitting on the bench outside the stable in the late daylight with their backs to the warm wall boards and the camp moving and clanging around them in the middle distance. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You went to his office for me," she said. "I told him about the contract." "You went to his office for me," she repeated, and it was not a question this time. Eli looked at the mountains. The gray spines were extraordinary at this hour, the rock faces going purple-gray in the lowering sun, the snow line catching the last of the gold. He had lived with this view for 2 years, and it still occasionally stopped him in his tracks. "Did you know," she said, quieter, "that among my clan if a man speaks for you before witnesses, it means something specific?" He looked at her. She was looking at the mountains too, but the line of her jaw was tense. "What does it mean?" "It means he is claiming the right to stand beside you." She paused. "Not above you, not to own you, beside." "That sounds right," he said. She turned her head and looked at him then, and he held the look. Her gold eyes in the evening light were something remarkable, amber shot through with copper, pupils wide in the dimming. Her tusks caught the last light. She was so striking it made his chest feel like something had been pressed against it. "You are a strange man, Eli Weston," she said. "Probably," he said. "The horses seem fine with me, so I've been getting away with it." For the first time she laughed. It was short and caught her by surprise as much as him, a low, warm sound that went away quickly but left something in the air after it. He grinned at the mountains and said nothing. The days accumulated. March turned toward April, and the snow on the passes softened without fully going. Sharamph spent her days on the mountain face, moving along the rock with a rope and a survey stick, making notations in her leather case with the focused confidence of someone who has made the mountain her conversational partner. Eli spent his days in the stables and the paddock, breaking 2 new draft horses the camp had bought from a trader in the valley, and that work was long and physical and demanded everything he had. In the evenings they ate together on the bench. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. He learned in pieces and over time who she was. She had grown up in the Doomhammer clan, which occupied the high passes to the northeast, fierce trackers and stone readers, known in the mountain range for their ability to navigate terrain that killed lowlanders. Her mother had been a war chief, a title that in the clan meant both military leader and primary mediator of disputes. Her father had been a cartographer, human-trained, who had brought back instruments and methods that made his wife's war band the best navigated in the north. Sharamph had inherited both, her mother's bluntness and physical presence, her father's precision. She had left the clan at 22 after a dispute over a planned raid that she had opposed and been overruled on. She did not say what had happened on that raid. He did not ask. He had learned from the horses that there were things you did not push and things that would come in their own time. She was 28 now. She had been working contracts for 6 years. She was, as far as Eli could tell, somewhere between the best at what she did and genuinely legendary at it, and she moved through the world with the loneliness of a person who has become so capable that most people interact with what she can do rather than who she is. He understood that. It was not the same loneliness as his. He was ordinary where she was exceptional, unremarkable where she was impossible to ignore, but it was the same shape. The quiet at the end of the day when there was no one who was actually glad you were there. "You have been staring at nothing for 10 minutes, she said one evening. "Thinking," he said. "About what?" He considered how honest to be. Then he decided the horses had already taught him that hedging was mostly wasted energy. "About the fact that you haven't told me anything bad about yourself." She raised an eyebrow, a single dark curve moving upward. "I have told you about the raid. You've told me you opposed a raid." "That's telling me something good." He turned his coffee mug in his hands. "I mean the things that are actually difficult, the things that make you hard to be around." A short pause. "I have been told I am relentless. That doesn't sound bad to me. Uncompromising. Also not bad. Intimidating to the point that most people would rather I were absent," she said, and there was something careful and direct in the way she said it, the way a person delivers a truth they have had to practice accepting. Most people find what I am to be too much, too loud, too strong, too present. He looked at her. I don't, she met his look. The amber in her eyes was very warm in the firelight from the stove they had dragged outside on the mild evening. I know, she said. That is what I cannot quite account for. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had weight and warmth, the quality of something on the edge of changing. He reached across the bench and touched the back of her hand. Not a hold, just the lightest press of his fingers against her knuckles, deliberate and unmistakable. She looked down at his hand. She did not move hers away. I'm going to say something, he said, and you can tell me if I have it wrong. Say it. You're remarkable, he said, and I think you know it. But I don't think anyone has ever been glad of it for you rather than for themselves. The expression that crossed her face then was not one he had seen before. It was too complicated to name quickly surprise and something older and more wounded underneath it, and something else that was almost relief, the way a person looks when they finally hear the word they had stopped expecting to hear. She turned her hand over beneath his. Her fingers closed around his and held. They sat like that until the stars were thick overhead, and the camp around them had gone quiet. The trouble came in the third week of April, as trouble in mountain camps tends to do, quickly, without visible warning, and from more than one direction at once. The direction Eli had been watching was the list, but the direction he had not been watching was a man named Callum Breck. Breck was a mine surveyor human who had arrived at the camp 4 days after Sharamph. He was Dast's man, brought in at Dast's specific request to review the Western Face Survey, and as became apparent over the following weeks, to produce documentation that could justify concluding Sharamph's contract early on grounds of insufficient accuracy. Eli discovered this by accident. He was fixing a loose wheel on one of the timber wagons behind the main hall when Dast and Breck came out of the back door not 15 feet away, speaking in the low, clipped tones of men who believed themselves unobserved. He did not move. He kept his hands on the wheel hub and his head down. She has 8 more weeks of survey work, Dast said. I want grounds by the end of the month. The survey is solid, Breck said, and he sounded unhappy about it. Genuinely. I have been going over her notations. They are better than anything I could produce in twice the time. Then fabricate a discrepancy, a silence. Or find one, Dast said, if your conscience requires it. But she cannot be here through the summer. The men's mood is already difficult enough. The men's mood is difficult because you put a list on the board, Breck said quietly. Find the discrepancy, Dast said. I expect a report by the 30th. Their footsteps went back inside. Eli sat on the ground behind the wagon wheel for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on his thighs because if he put them anywhere near a tool right now, he would put the tool through something. He went to find Sharamph. He found her on the eastern training ground where the draft horses were worked, because she had taken to watching him work with the horses in the late afternoons. He had started teaching her 2 weeks ago, half by accident. She had asked a question about how he knew when a horse was afraid versus angry, and he had answered it, and then she had asked another question, and they had been at it for 40 minutes before either of them noticed. She was standing at the fence rail when he found her. The big gray draft horse he had been breaking, the one she had named under her breath as Fog, was standing 3 feet from her with his nose extended, and she was letting him come to her in his own time. Don't let him crowd you, Eli said from habit. He won't, she said. I smell like the mountain. He likes the mountain. She turned when she heard something in his tone. What happened? He told her, all of it exactly as it had been said without softening. She listened with the flat, focused expression she brought to things that required her to think instead of react. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He will falsify the survey, she said. He'll try. My notations are in my survey case if the case is tampered with, I know. He leaned on the fence next to her. We need to make copies. She looked at him sharply. You know how to copy survey notations. I can read maps, he said. I can't redraw the technical ones, but for the written notes and the basic face diagrams, yes. When? Tonight, If we start after supper, we can have the essential pages done before morning." She was looking at him with that direct, unguarded expression again, the one that undid him a little every time it appeared. "You are doing this again," she said. "Which part?" Standing beside me, she paused, "as though it is simply what you do." "It is," he said. She reached over and put her hand on the back of his neck, brief and warm, fingers pressing once into the muscle there. It was gentle for a woman who could have crushed the rail fence, and the tenderness of it was the thing that made it remarkable. Then she let go and turned back to Fogg, who had finally made up his mind and was pressing his nose into her sternum. "Tonight," she said. "After supper." "After supper," he agreed. They worked by lantern light in the stable loft, Eli with the flattest of the survey diagrams spread on the floor while Sharamph dictated from the case, and he copied with a steady hand. She caught him making an error on the third page, a measurement transposed, and corrected it without comment, then guided him through the next notation with a patience that matched his own when he was working with a difficult horse. They were on the 8th page when she said from across the loft, "My father used to say that the mountains speak plainly. If you listen carefully enough, they tell you everything you need to know, where they are weak, where they are strong, where they would rather you did not go." He kept copying. "You miss him. He died 4 winters ago, a fall on the Eastern Pass. I'm sorry. He would have liked you," she said, and she said it simply, as though she had thought about it before and already resolved the conclusion. He liked people who listened. Eli set down the charcoal stick and looked up at her. She was sitting with her back against the wall and her long legs stretched across the loft floor, the survey case open in her lap, lamplight making the gold of her eyes glow. Her braid had come loose at the bottom, dark hair falling over one shoulder. She looked like someone completely at ease in her own skin, which she generally did, but in this small, warm, private space it was somehow more vivid. He crossed the loft and sat down next to her, shoulder to shoulder against the wall. She did not shift away. She turned the page in the survey case. "Tell me about the Western face," he said. And she did, not the survey language but the story of it, the way the rock moved and folded, the crack system that ran through the limestone like old arguments, the places where the mountain breathed water in the spring thaw, and the places where it was so dense and tight it would stand for another 10,000 years. She talked about it with a love that surprised him, not because she was capable of love, but because he had not expected it directed at stone. At some point the lantern burned lower and they were still talking, quieter now, and at some point she had shifted so that her shoulder was not just touching his but resting against it, her weight leaning into him with an ease that felt like an answer to a question he had not quite finished asking. He turned his head. She turned hers. They were close enough that he could see the precise amber and copper detail in her eyes and the faint lines at their corners from years of squinting into mountain light. He brought his hand up and tucked the loose strand of hair back from her face, carefully, his thumb just brushing the line of her jaw. She let him. She held his gaze the entire time. "Eli," she said. "Yes. If I were to tell you that among my people the act of leaning is considered a declaration of intention," she paused, and the hint of something warm and deliberate moved through her voice, "what would you say?" "I'd say I know," he said, "because you told me 2 weeks ago about speaking for someone before witnesses, and I've been listening to everything you say since the day you arrived." The smile that came then was something different from the brief startled laugh of that first week. This one was slow and open, and entirely for him. She leaned forward and kissed him, and it was exactly like her, direct and decided and warm, her hand coming up to his jaw with a precision that suggested she had thought about exactly where she was going to put it. He kissed her back with everything he had, which was considerable, and one of her tusks grazed his cheek by accident and she pulled back immediately with an expression that was almost embarrassed. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. "Do it again." She laughed, and then she did. The copies were finished by midnight. Eli wrapped them in wax cloth and hid them in the false bottom of the feed box in Keth's stall, which was a hiding place he had built 18 months ago to protect his wages during a stretch when the camp had a theft problem. Sharamph watched him close the latch and stood there in the stable with her arms folded and a thoughtful expression. "You built that," she said. "Seemed useful at the time. You are a practical man. Horses teach you to be." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, what happens if Breck submits his false report before we can use the copies?" "We go to Dast with the originals and the copies together, show the discrepancy, and let him explain why his man's report contradicts the documentation." He paused. "But we only get that move once. Once it's made, whatever goodwill Dast has for either of us is done." "He has no goodwill for me," she said. "He has professional respect," Eli said, "which in his language is goodwill. He'll go against his own list to protect the survey work if the alternative is looking incompetent in front of the camp board." He leaned against the stall rail. "But if Breck gets to him first with fabricated discrepancies, Dast will use it. He'll believe what he wants to believe. Then we need to move first." "We need to wait for Breck to show his hand," Eli said. "If we go now with nothing, we look paranoid. If we wait until he makes a move, we have something concrete to answer with." She looked at him for a long moment. "How do you know this?" "I grew up in a market town," he said. "My mother ran a livery. There was always someone trying to take it." He paused. "You learn to let people make the first mistake." She nodded slowly. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," he said, "you finish the survey." The blow, when it came, was not from the direction of Breck's report. It came from a rumor. On the 22nd of April, a story moved through the camp with the speed that only stories driven by fear can achieve. The story, in various versions, alleged that Sharamph Doomhammer was not a contracted surveyor, but an advanced scout for an orc warband conducting reconnaissance on the camp's ore deposits. That her presence in the stables with the animals was a deliberate stratagem to prevent discovery. That she had been sending messages out through Keth, tied to the stallion's bridle ring, to contacts in the northern passes. Not one word of it was true. Eli knew this with absolute certainty, because he knew every horse in the camp and what left with them and what arrived, and nothing unusual had passed through the stables. But truth was not the issue. Fear was the issue. Dast's list had already done the work of cultivating the soil. This story simply planted the seed. By noon, there were 24 men gathered in the open yard outside the main hall. Not a mob, nothing so simple. A crowd, which was almost worse. Crowds think in a single direction and call it consensus. Eli found Sharamph returning from the mountain face, survey case under her arm, and intercepted her at the paddock gate before she reached the yard. "Stay here for a moment," he said quietly. She read his face. "What happened?" He told her fast and low. Her jaw tightened with each word, but she did not look away from him or panic. When he finished, she was still. Then she said, "I have never carried a message in my life that was not part of a documented survey. Everything I have sent or received is logged in the case." "I know." "Then I will tell them that." "You can try," he said. But Sharamph, a crowd that already believes something, does not generally respond well to evidence. "I will not hide," she said, with a finality that was completely non-negotiable. She was looking past him at the yard, gold eyes flat and direct. "I will not hide in your stable and wait for this to pass. That is not who I am." "I know," he said again. "Then we go together." She looked at him. Something moved through her expression that he could not name, but it softened the line of her jaw slightly. "Yes," she said, "together." They walked into the yard side by side. The crowd turned. Eli had been right that there were 24 men at the core of it. There were also perhaps 60 more gathered on the periphery, watching from doorways and the roofs of lower outbuildings. Corvin was there, in the middle of the yard. So was Dast, standing at the edge of the hall steps with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been handed a situation he had not quite wanted to handle this directly. It was Corvin who spoke first. "There she is," he said, not loudly, which was worse. "The scout." "I am not a scout," Sharamph said, and her voice carried easily across the yard. "I am a surveyor, contracted, paid, and documented. Everything I have done at this camp is in this case." She held up the survey case. If any man here can point to a single piece of evidence that I have acted against this camp's interest, let him bring it. The horse, someone said from the crowd. Messages tied to the horse's bridle. Name the man who found such a message, Sharamph said. Name the message, describe what it contained. Silence. There is no such man, she said, because no such message exists. Eli stepped forward half a pace, not in front of her but visibly with her. She's right, he said. Every animal in my stables is my responsibility. I know everything that leaves this yard on a horse's back. There has been no message. There has been nothing. How do you know? Someone called. Maybe she's got you fooled. She hasn't got me fooled, Eli said evenly. I watch the animals. That's my job. I'm good at my job. And I'm telling you there is nothing. Corvin was looking at him with an expression that had gone from dismissive to something harder. You're standing up for a greenskin. I'm standing up for a colleague who is being accused without evidence, Eli said, which I'd do for anyone in this camp. The crowd was not mollified, but it was uncertain, which was different. Uncertainty is something you can work with. Dast descended the hall steps. He walked into the middle of the yard with the careful step of a man exercising authority before it becomes necessary to demonstrate it, which Eli gave him credit for. Doomhammer, he said, looking at Sharamph. The survey case is to be made available for camp record review. All contents. Today? Agreed, she said without hesitation. Weston, he said, I want a written account of every animal movement in the camp over the past 3 weeks, by this evening. Yes, sir, Eli said. Good. Dast looked at the crowd. Return to work. This is a wage day, not a holiday. The crowd dispersed. Not warmly, not with any great sense of resolution, but it dispersed. Corvin was the last to go. He looked at Eli as he left, a long look with something complicated in it, not respect exactly, but the acknowledgement one fighter gives another after a bout that went longer than expected. When the yard was empty, Dast looked at both of them. His expression was unreadable. The survey review will be thorough, he said. If the work is sound, the contract continues. He paused. If anything irregular is found, the arrangement ends immediately. The work is sound, Sharamph said. Dast went back inside. Eli let out a long, slow breath. Beside him, Sharamph was doing the same thing, though she would not have wanted anyone to notice. That went as well as it could have, he said. It went badly, she said. It went as well as it could have, he repeated firmly. He touched her arm. You were extraordinary. She looked at him, and the expression was the one he had started learning to recognize, the one that arrived when something reached through the armor and touched the actual person. She did not look away from it this time. The night, she said, is going to be difficult. Yes, he said, but we'll manage the night. The review of Sharamph's survey case took place the following morning in Dast's office, with Dast, Breck, and a third man, the camp's senior engineer, a taciturn half-blood named Merck who had survived the list by the slender margin of his indispensability, examining every notation and diagram. Eli was not invited, but Sharamph was, and she went in with the original survey case and said nothing about the copies hidden under the feed box. Breck, apparently, had decided that fabricating discrepancies in the face of direct scrutiny was more personally dangerous than he had calculated. His review produced nothing. The work was, as he had told Dast privately, better than anything he could produce in twice the time. He said so in the formal record, which Eli thought was the most honest thing the man had done since arriving, and probably the most personally costly. The contract was upheld. The Western Face survey continued. The problem with mountain camps in the spring thaw, the real problem, the one that made experienced men nervous in ways they rarely articulated directly, was that the mountain changed. The cold that had held everything tight and still over the winter released its grip in stages, unpredictably, and what had been solid and reliable in February could become something entirely different in May. Sharamph knew this better than anyone. She had spent the past 6 weeks mapping precisely that unreliability, charting the fissures and weak points, with the meticulous care of someone who understood that mountains were not stationary objects, but slow, ongoing events. She came back from the face on the morning of the 1st of May at a pace that was not quite running but was clearly faster than surveying, and she came straight to Eli in the paddock where he was working fog through a leading exercise. "The bridge," she said, "the timber bridge on the eastern approach. When was it last inspected?" Eli let Fogg walk in a slow circle on the long lead. 3 weeks ago. The camp engineer signed it off." "It is wrong," she said. "I was on the face above it this morning. The south support footing is sitting on a fissure that has widened since the thaw. A degree of further thaw or any significant load and it will go." "How wide is the fissure?" "Wide enough," she said. "The support looks sound from the bridge deck. From above, the footing is on 5 centimeters of weathered stone over a hollow space that is filling with melt water." He dropped the lead. "How much time?" "I do not know, days possibly, less if there is rain." She met his eyes. "The morning timber run is in 4 hours, 8 full wagons fully loaded. That is the heaviest load that bridge carries all week." He was already moving. "Come on." They went to Dast's office at something close to a run, which was not a thing Eli generally did inside the main hall building. Dast was there. Breck was there. Merk was there, which was fortunate. Sharamph laid out the situation in under 2 minutes. The fissure, the footing, the hollow space, the melt water, the load, the timetable. Merk, who had been silent until this point, looked at her and said, "How confident are you?" "Entirely," she said. Merk looked at Dast. "Stop the morning run." Dast's jaw worked. Stopping the morning run meant a full day's timber loss. It meant explaining to the camp board why the certified bridge had been held on the word of an orc surveyor, whose continued presence in the camp was already politically fraught. It meant every calculation that Dast had been making for the past 2 months running against him at once. "If the survey is wrong," Dast started. "If the survey is wrong, you lose a day of timber," Merk said. "If the survey is right and we send those wagons, we lose 8 drivers, 16 horses, and whatever section of the river road goes with them." He did not raise his voice. "I will personally inspect the footing in the next 2 hours, but the run does not leave until I do." Dast looked at the wall for a moment. Then, "Stop the run. Merk, get on the bridge." The bridge was a timber span 40 feet across and 12 feet wide, crossing a tributary of the main Timber River at a point where the water ran fast and loud over a 10-foot drop. It was built on 4 stone footing piers, 2 in the water and 2 on the bank. The South Bank pier was the one Sharamph had flagged. They went out in a group, Merk with his inspection tools, Dast, Eli, Sharamph, and 2 of the senior foremen who had been informed, and were clearly braced for one of the possible outcomes to be professionally embarrassing for them. Merk went down the bank on a rope to inspect the footing from below. He was down for 11 minutes. When he came back up, his face was the particular shade of pale that men go when they have been right about something they dearly wish to be wrong about. "Pull the bridge," he said. "Immediately. Do not put a single wheel on it." Dast looked at Sharamph. She looked back at him. There was a moment between them that was not quite apology and not quite anything else but contained the acknowledgement of something important shifting. "How long to replace the footing?" Dast asked Merk. 3 weeks minimum. The South Bank will need full excavation and relay. Can we use the upper ford in the meantime?" "The upper ford adds 4 miles to the run," a foreman said. 4 miles is better than a river," Eli said from next to Sharamph. Dast looked at him. For a long moment something moved through the overseer's expression that Eli had not seen before. Then he said, "Yes. Begin the upper ford schedule." He looked back at Sharamph. The survey was correct. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. Then he walked back toward camp. The 2 foremen followed. Merk lingered long enough to look at Sharamph with an expression of genuine and uncomplicated respect, then went after them. Eli and Sharamph stood alone on the bank of the tributary. The water below was very loud and very fast, running high with snowmelt. The bridge above it was still solid looking from the deck, all the way to the footing that was 5 centimeters of weathered stone over a hollow space full of water waiting to fail. She was looking at the bridge. If the morning run had gone, she said. It didn't, he said. 8 drivers, she said, 16 horses. Sharamph. He turned to face her fully. She turned to face him too. Her jaw was set and her eyes were bright, and he recognized the expression now. It was what happened when something finally fully landed in her. Not the professional assessment, the actual weight of it. He put his arms around her. She went still for a moment. Then her arms came around him, and she held on with a strength that would have alarmed him if he had not known exactly where it was coming from. She was not trembling. She did not make a sound. But she held on, and he held on, and the tributary was loud below them, and the bridge stood over it, being quietly, invisibly wrong. "Have you?" he said into her hair. "It's done, you got it right." "I was afraid," she said very quietly, "that I had it wrong, that I would send Das to stop the run on a mistake, that everything would." She stopped. "But you weren't wrong," he said. "No," she said, "I was not wrong." He pressed his lips to her forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin against his mouth. "You're never wrong about the mountain." A short exhale against his shoulder that was almost a laugh. "I have been wrong," she said. "Twice. In 6 years. About rocks, about people." She was quiet for a moment. "About men who looked right and were not." He pulled back enough to see her face. She was looking at him with the same directness she gave everything, but there was something raw in it now that she was not attempting to hide. "I'm going to be here," he said. "I need you to know that, not because you need me to be, because it's where I want to be." She studied him the way she studied the mountain face, reading every line, looking for the fissures. Then she said, "I know." She kissed him, and this time there was no accidental graze, just the sure and deliberate press of her mouth and the warmth of her hands on either side of his face, holding him the way she held instruments she valued, with a care that felt like a declaration. The aftermath of the bridge was the turning point in the camp's mood. The change was not instantaneous or universal. Prejudice that has been fed by an official list does not reverse itself because one woman was right about a piece of geology. But the 8 timber drivers who had been scheduled for the morning run began to function as a kind of walking counterargument to everything Corvin's crowd had been saying. They had seen Merck's face come up from below that footing. They had done the arithmetic themselves. Corvin, to Eli's surprise, was the first to cross the yard to Sharamph directly. He did it on a Tuesday afternoon while she was returning from the face, and he did it with the look of a man who has been having an argument with himself for several days and has finally run out of counterarguments. "About what I said before," he said. Sharamph stopped. She looked at him. He was a big man and he filled a lot of space, but in front of her he still had to look up slightly, and Eli could see from where he was standing by the paddock that this was not sitting comfortably with Corvin's self-image. "You were wrong," she said evenly. "I was wrong," he said. A pause. "You should have been wrong differently," she said. "There is a way to be wrong that is still honest. What you did in the yard was not honest, it was borrowed fear." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "I know." She looked at him for another beat. Then she walked past him toward the stables. Eli fell into step beside her. "Borrowed fear," he said. "It is the worst kind," she said. "You are afraid of something you have never considered yourself, using the fear of someone who has thought about it even less. That's a fair description of how it works." "I know how it works," she said. "I grew up watching it from the other side." He thought about that. He thought about what it must be to move through the world in a body that people had decided to be afraid of, to carry that reality into every camp and contract and town and market, to have to be twice as precise and 3 times as documented just to hold the ground that other people stood on by default. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you've had to deal with it your whole life." She glanced at him. "You are sorry for the whole thing," he said. "I know that doesn't do much." "You standing in the yard did more than being sorry," she said. Then quieter, "But I accept it." They walked back to the stables in the long afternoon light, and it was quiet between them in the way that had come to mean something. May deepened and the mountains grew generous in the way they only were for 6 weeks of the year. The high slopes green-gray with new growth above the timber line, the rivers loud and cold, the sky at altitude a precise deep blue that looked painted. Eli worked with the horses in the early mornings and the late afternoons, and in the middle of the day he and Sharamph were increasingly in the same places at the same times in ways that were no longer accidental. The loft above the stables had become something different from what it started as. It was still her sleeping space, but their evenings had migrated up there as naturally as everything else had shifted between them. Eli sitting against the wall with his back and her with her survey maps between them, talking about the mountain, about horses, about the clan country she had come from, and the market town he had grown up in. She had begun to tell him stories about the Doomhammer clan, the way she told him about the mountain, not as a tourist might describe a sight, but as someone pointing out the features of a place they carry inside them. Her mother's war camp in the high pass, with its elk-hide tents and its permanently burning fire that was never allowed to go out because it had been lit at her grandmother's binding ceremony. The ceremony of stone marking, where a young clan member made their first solo ascent and left a carved mark at the summit as a record of the fact that they had been there. Her own mark left at 23 on a peak 3 days from the camp, a simple D-hammer cut into the granite with a knife that had been her father's. She brought out the knife once to show him. It was not large, a hand's length, bone handle, iron blade worn narrow with decades of use. He held it with the respect it deserved and handed it back. "That's the most important thing you own," he said. "Yes," she said. She turned it in her hands, looking at it. Then she looked at him. "Among my clan there is a custom." She paused, choosing words. "When a woman decides that a man is hers, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of choosing and being chosen, she marks him with this knife. A small cut, here." She touched the inside of her own forearm just below the wrist. Then her own mark. The two marks are recorded together in the clan record. He was quiet, watching her face. "I am not asking," she said. "We are not at my clan. There is no record to be kept." Another pause. "But I want you to know that I think about it." He held out his left forearm. "Do it," he said. She looked at his arm, then at his face. "You understand what it means. You just explained it to me." Eli. Her voice had something in it he had not heard before, not uncertainty, because she did not do uncertainty, but something adjacent. The sound of a person standing at a threshold they have not expected to reach. "This is not something I have offered before." "I know," he said. "I want you to know that I'm not the kind of man who takes something like this lightly." He held her gaze. "It means what it means to you. It means what it means to me. I'm in." She set the blade against the inside of his forearm very gently. The cut was small and precise, a line, then the angular mark that was the Doomhammer clan sign. He breathed through it. It stung clean and sharp and was done in seconds. Then she made the same marks on her own forearm. They sat there in the lamplight of the loft looking at the two sets of marks, his and hers matching, drying at the edges. "I have chosen you," she said. "I have chosen you," he said back, because it was true and he wanted her to hear it in those exact words. She leaned in and kissed him with a gravity and a warmth that matched everything. He pulled her closer and she came, settling against him with the surety of someone who has stopped being surprised by feeling welcome. Her hands were at the back of his neck and his jaw, and he could feel her warmth all along his side, and the kiss went on until they were both breathing differently, and then she rested her forehead against his, golden eyes closed. "Stay up here tonight," she said. "Yes," he said. In the morning he was still there when the sun came up. He was not asleep when the light came through the loft's high window. He had woken before dawn the way he always did, the deep habit of animal care, but he had stayed. He was lying with Sharamph's heavy, warm weight against his side, her breathing slow and even, her braid undone and her dark hair across the pillow. He watched the light arrive in the loft in the way light only arrives in the mountains, slow and gray first, then suddenly gold, shifting from the window across the straw-dusted floor, and climbing the wall to where the short sword hung on its peg. Sharamph woke when the light reached her. He felt her stillness change, the particular shift from sleeping to aware that she did with the same completeness she did everything, instantly and entirely. She turned her head. She looked at him. "You are here," she said. "I am here," he said. Something in her face opened, not in a way that showed weakness, but in the way that showed the presence of something enormous and real. She reached up and put her palm flat on his chest over his heart and held it there. "Last night," she said, "I thought," she stopped, started again. "I have slept beside people before, briefly. They were always gone before morning." He covered her hand with his. "I am not brief," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "I know." She had known it for a while, he thought, but hearing it confirmed when the sun was up was different. Mornings had their own kind of honesty. He kissed the top of her head and got up to see to the horses, because the horses needed to eat regardless of the weight and beauty of what was happening in the loft above them. She came down 20 minutes later, fully dressed, survey case in hand, and she was at the loft stairs when he called up to her. "Sharamph." She looked down at him. The early light came through the stable doors behind him and caught the green of her skin, the gold of her eyes, the precise fit of her leathers, the faint double mark on her forearm. "Good morning," he said. She did not quite smile, but something moved through her that was the full equivalent of one. "Good morning, Eli." She went out to the mountain. 3 days later, on a warm morning in the middle of May, the thing they had been waiting for happened. Callum Breck arrived at the stables looking for Eli. He found him in the back stall, treating a small injury on one of the draft horses. He came in and stood at the stall door with the look of a man who has made a decision that cost him something and is trying not to show how much. "Weston," he said. Eli kept working. "Breck." A pause. "I want you to know that I did not fabricate anything. I told Dast the truth, that the survey was sound." "I know," Eli said. "Dast had the record." Another pause, longer. "He did not take it well. My usefulness to him appears to have concluded." Breck looked at the floor. "I think I am being dismissed on Friday." Eli straightened. "Because you told the truth. Because I would not tell a useful lie." Breck looked at him directly for the first time. "I wanted you to know because I think you were right about what the list was and what was being asked of me." It was not a grand apology. It did not repair anything that had been broken in the camp, but it was honest, and Eli recognized honesty when he heard it. "Tell Dast before Friday that you're willing to go on record about what he asked you to do," Eli said. "He'll let you leave on your own terms." Breck looked at him. "You think he'll honor that?" "He'll honor it because the alternative is a man who has nothing to lose going to the camp board with the whole story." He paused. "He's not a good man, but he's a careful one. Use that." Breck was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once and left. Eli turned back to the horse. On a Saturday in the last week of May, Joran Dast posted a new notice on the board outside the main hall. Eli read it while he was on his way back from the supply store. He read it twice to make sure he had it right. The notice was a retraction. The Workforce Composition Standards document, the list was being withdrawn, pending review, at the direction of the camp board in Calvert, which was the southern town where Caro Camp's corporate owners operated. The retraction was signed by Dast and countersigned by a board member's representative. It was not an apology. It was a bureaucratic withdrawal, the kind that came when someone with real authority decided that the direction of travel was going to cause more problems than it solved. It was cold and impersonal, and it was not enough, and it was, at the same time, more than Eli had dared to count on. He stood in front of the board in the morning light and read it a third time. Behind him, someone stopped. He turned. Merk was standing there, reading over his shoulder with the expression of a man who has been holding something tight for a long time and is only now cautiously letting the grip ease. "The board," Merk said. "Someone complained," Eli said. "Probably more than one someone." "Breck," Merk said. Eli said nothing. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the notice. "The ones who left won't come back because of a piece of paper," Merk said. "No," Eli said. "But the ones who are still here get to breathe." Merk looked at him, and the expression that moved through the older man's face was one that Eli would not forget: quiet, tired, and deeply real. Then Merrick folded his hands behind his back and walked toward the mine. He brought the news to Sharamph on the mountain face. He climbed the approach trail she had worn into the eastern slope over the past 2 months, following the survey flags she had planted at intervals. He found her at the third outcropping, which she had named the shoulder because it jutted from the main face like 200 feet above the valley floor. She heard him coming and looked up from her notations. He pulled the copied notice out of his jacket. He had taken it down from the board and held it out to her. She read it. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way, but she read it a second time and then a third, and then she folded it carefully and looked out over the valley below. The camp was spread out below them, the long log buildings, the timber run, the repaired bridge footing they could see being worked on at the eastern approach, the smoke from the cookhouse, the horses moving in the paddock. Small from here, human-sized, the scale that reminded you what you were looking at when you got high enough. "Dast is finished here," she said. "I think so." The board doesn't pull a listed overseer's primary documentation without planning to pull the overseer. "He will find another camp," she said. "Another list." "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe not. People have reputations." He came to stand beside her at the edge of the shoulder. The drop below was real and significant, and neither of them stepped back from it. "You saved this camp." "The bridge," she said. "The bridge and the survey and the shaft work before I got here," he said. 3 things. Any one of them would have been enough. He paused. "You did it while being told you didn't belong here." She was quiet for a moment. "I have always worked in places where I was told I did not belong." "You belong wherever your work is needed," he said. "And you belong here with me." She turned to look at him. The wind up at the shoulder was real, pulling at her braid, cooling the sweat from the climb. Her gold eyes were warm and steady. "You belong with me," she said, and it was both the same thing and different because it was the one she had never said aloud before, the one that named what she needed rather than just what she gave. He took her hand. Her marked forearm was visible beneath her rolled sleeve, the 2 cuts healed clean to thin lines. "When the survey is finished," he said, "where do you go?" "I have 3 more possible contracts," she said. 2 are in the lowlands. 1 is at a smaller camp in the eastern Grayspines. "I have been thinking about asking Dast's replacement if there is a permanent position," he said. "For both of us, the camp will need a surveyor. They will certainly need someone to keep the horses from going feral." He paused. "But if you would rather move on, I can move with you. I have been doing this work long enough to find it anywhere." He looked at her. "I want to be where you are." She was looking at him with that expression. The one he still could not fully name, the one that was behind her eyes and at the corners of her mouth, and in the careful stillness she got when something reached the person underneath the armor. "You would leave this camp," she said. "For me." "I would leave this mountain range for you," he said, "but I thought I should start with something reasonable." She made a sound half exasperated, half something rich and warm, and pulled him in by the front of his jacket and kissed him the way you kiss someone on a mountain with the whole valley below and the wind in your hair and nothing between you and the sky. He kissed her back the same way, with everything, holding on to her and the moment both, because moments like this were mountain weather. They did not come twice, and they did not stay. When she let him go, she was still holding the lapels of his jacket, and she was looking at him like something she had given up on finding and then found anyway. "The Eastern Grayspines contract," she said. "I would like to take it. It is 3 months of work and the terrain is interesting." She paused. "It is also only 40 miles from my clan's winter territory." He understood what she was not saying. "You want to go home." "I want to go back," she corrected. "There is a difference, but yes." She looked at the valley below. "And I want to take you with me." "I would go," he said, "very much." "They will not make it easy," she said. "You are human." "I've noticed that's complicated for people," he said. "I'll manage." The look she gave him then was almost amused, but the amusement was underlaid by something enormous. "You have managed everything else." "I've been practicing," he said. Dast was gone from the camp by the end of the first week of June. He left on a Tuesday morning with 2 bags and no ceremony, which was more closure than most people got from a man who had spent 4 months trying to quietly dismantle the workforce. His replacement, a stocky woman from the western lowlands named Idris, arrived on Friday. Eli met Idris at the gate because the horses were part of his responsibility, and her horse was part of the camp's. She dismounted, handed him the reins, and looked around the camp with the bright, direct gaze of someone cataloging the condition of a thing they have just inherited. "You are Weston," she said. "Yes. I've read your camp report. Your stable records are better than the mine records." She paused. "That tells me something about relative competence." "It tells you the mine foreman is overworked," Eli said. She smiled, brief and real. "It tells me both things." She handed over her saddlebag as well. "The board's review of the previous administration's personnel decisions is complete. Anyone who left under the composition policy is being offered reinstatement with back pay." She looked at him levelly. "I understand there are ongoing contracts that were affected." "One," he said. "Sharamph Doomhammer, she is still here. Her contract is current." "Good," Idris said. "I have heard about the bridge. I want to speak with her." She glanced at the stable. "And I have heard about the loft." He met her eyes. "Is that a problem?" She looked at him for a moment with the measuring expression of someone weighing something quickly and accurately. Then she said, "Not even slightly," and walked toward the main hall. The survey of the western face was completed on the 14th of June, 6 weeks ahead of Dast's original pessimistic schedule. It was complete, documented, accurate, and cross-referenced with the shaft work from the previous winter. Merck, who led the final review, presented it to the camp board's representative with the kind of quiet, forceful certainty that comes from a man who has no agenda beyond the quality of the work. The board's representative was a brisk woman from Calvert who spent 2 hours with the documentation and then said, in front of the assembled senior camp staff, "This is the finest mountain face survey I have reviewed in 20 years of board work." She said it to Idris, but she was looking at Sharamph. Sharamph received this with the same equanimity she received everything, but Eli was standing near enough to her in the meeting room to see the very slight shift in her posture, the fractional easing of shoulders that had been held tight for months, and he felt something large and relieved settle in his own chest. Afterward, in the yard, Idris came to find them both. "The Eastern Grayspine's contract," she said to Sharamph. "You are taking it?" "Yes," Sharamph said. "I want first option on your return," Idris said. "The northern face will need survey work next winter. I want it done properly." She paused. "I want you to do it." Sharamph looked at her steadily. "I accept that offer." Idris nodded. She looked at Eli. "You are going with her?" "If the camp can spare me," he said. "I will manage," Idris said dryly. "Come back in the autumn and I'll have a full-time position for you both." She looked between them. "The horses here are the best conditioned I have seen in a mountain camp. I have a particular interest in expanding the draft horse operation. Your skills would be relevant." She paused. "Both of your skills, the horses and the mountain." Eli looked at Sharamph. Sharamph looked at him. "We will think about it," she said. "Think quickly," Idris said, and went back inside. They left on the 18th of June, early in the morning, with Keth and a bay pack horse named River that Eli had bought from the camp's stock at a fair price. The camp was not yet fully awake. A few of the early shift workers were at the cookhouse. Merck was at the mine entrance, checking something, and he raised a hand as they passed. Fogg put his head over the paddock fence and watched them go. Corvin was leaning against the main gate as they rode out. He looked at Eli and then at Sharamph and then at the marks on their forearms, visible below rolled sleeves in the early warmth. "Safe roads," he said. It was not warm exactly, but it was real. "And to you," Sharamph said. The gate fell behind them. The road dropped into the valley in long, easy switchbacks, the mountain rising at their backs, the morning light coming across the grayspans in long sheets of gold that made the whole world look newly built. The air was cool and smelled of pine and moving water. Eli let Keth set the pace, which was steady and purposeful. River followed behind on a loose lead. Sharamph rode at Eli's left shoulder, her survey case strapped behind the saddle, her braid lifted slightly in the morning wind. They had been riding for perhaps an hour when the sound began. It started as a feeling rather than a sound, a low, resonant trembling in the air, the kind that comes from high places and travels through the rock before it reaches the ear. Eli felt it in the saddle and in his hands on the reins, and he looked up at the high eastern face automatically, because that was what you did in the Grayspans when the mountain spoke. Sharamph was already looking. She was looking at a specific point on the face, 300 feet up, where the winter snowpack still sat in a heavy belt along a natural ledge, and where the morning sun was hitting it at an angle that was, for the first time in weeks, warm enough to matter. "Eli," she said. He heard what she heard. Not a crack. Cracks were quick and decisive. This was a grinding, oceanic exhalation, the sound of something vast losing its grip. "Which way?" he said, already reining Keth hard right toward the valley floor. "Left," she said simultaneously. They looked at each other for a fraction of a second. She was reading the mountain and he was reading the road. "Left," he said, and turned Keth. She was already moving, wheeling her stallion left toward the tree line at the valley edge, where the road dropped behind a ridge of outcropping stone. He followed with River behind him, and the sound above them shifted from grinding to something else entirely. A low roar that built with extraordinary speed, the way water builds in a channel when the dam goes. The avalanche came off the eastern face in a white wall, not directly above them but slightly west 50 feet, perhaps 60, in the margin that made every difference. It came down with the full weight of the mountain's stored winter behind it, and it crossed the road they had been on 30 seconds ago in a wave of snow and broken stone, and displaced air that hit them even at the edge of the tree line like a pushed wall, hard and cold and dense with ice crystals. Keth screamed and lunged. River bolted on the lead. Eli held onto both, wrapping the lead twice around the saddle horn and bringing Keth to a stop with the steady, deep pressure that meant "This is not happening. I have you. We are stopping." The stallion shook. His whole body was shaking, but he stopped. Sharamph was 10 feet away on the other side of a pine trunk, controlling her horse with the same focused force. Her eyes were wide, not with panic, but with the bright, alive attention of the body after real danger. The roar faded. The air was white with snow dust. They looked at each other through the settling white. The road was gone. In its place, where the switchback had been, there was a field of snow and broken stone 40 feet deep and 100 feet wide. The pass would be closed for weeks. The trail they had planned to take was under 10 tons of rock. Eli started to laugh. He could not help it. It came out of him in a great, relieved, undignified burst, and he put his hand over his face and laughed until his eyes watered. Sharamph stared at him for a moment with an expression of genuine bewilderment. Then something cracked open in her face and she laughed too, the full, real laugh, deep and warm and not at all brief, her head back against the tree, her stallion turning to look at her as though reconsidering his life choices. "Left," he managed when he could speak. "I told you left," she said, still laughing. "You said left and I turned left. I know, that is why we are not under that." She gestured at the snow field. The gesture was enormous, and the laughter was still in her voice, and it was the most beautiful thing he had thought he had ever seen. He rode over to her through the settled snow, stepping Keth carefully over the scattered debris at the tree line edge, and came alongside her. Their knees were almost touching. Keth and her stallion regarded each other with the weary tolerance of animals who had been through a great deal today and were reserving judgment on further developments. She was looking at him. The laughter had settled into something warmer and steadier, and the expression on her face was open and unguarded in the way that came after great fear or great relief or great love. The way you look when the armor is simply unnecessary. "I told you," she said, and her voice was lower now just for him, "that I have been wrong about men twice, men who looked right." "Yes," he said. "I have been trying," she said, "to find the place where you will look wrong for 2.5 months. She paused. "I cannot find it." He reached over and took her hand. "That's because I'm not trying to look right," he said. I'm just here." She held his hand. The snow was settling around them, clean and white and new-made. The mountain was still again, having said everything it needed to say. The sun was clearing the ridge above, and the valley below was gold and green in the early summer morning, and everything was broken and exactly right. "There is another route," she said. "South of the pass. It adds 2 days." "2 days is fine," he said. "I have nowhere I need to be except with you." She squeezed his hand once firmly, the way you close a door on a room you are sure about. Then she let go, gathered her reins, and turned her stallion south. He followed. The 2 extra days turned out to be the best 2 days of Eli Weston's 26 years. They made camp the first night in a protected hollow at the timber line. The horses picketed on long lines with good grass. A small fire built from fallen pine. The sky above them so full of stars it looked carved. Sharamph had set up the camp with the same sure efficiency she applied to everything, and Eli had seen to the horses, and when they sat down by the fire the space between them was nothing at all. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The fire was small and warm, and the night was cold the way mountain nights in June were cold, clean, and sharp, and not unpleasant with the right company. She told him about the stone-marking ceremony. She described it in detail this time, the specific route to the peak she had climbed alone at 23, the precise way the light had been when she reached the summit, the cold of the knife in her hand as she made the mark, the feeling of being the only person in the world and finding out that you were enough to be a complete world on your own. "It is not a sad thing," she said, "being enough on your own, but it is a different thing from being chosen." "Yes," he said. "I have been enough on my own for a long time," she said. "I forgot what the second thing felt like." He pressed his lips to her temple. "You remember now." "I remember now," she said. They slept by the fire, and he was there when the morning came. The second day's riding took them through a forest that Sharamph moved through with a deep familiarity, pointing out features in the stone and the tree growth that told her which clans had traveled here, how recently, what season. She read the mountain the way he read horses in the small signs that only spoke to those who had learned the language. He asked questions. She answered them. He asked more questions. She answered those too, and the tone of her answers changed through the day, becoming less instructional and more like a conversation between 2 people who had things to show each other, which was what it was. At the crest of the southern pass, with the eastern grayspine stretching ahead of them and the deep valley of the Doomhammer territory visible in the long distance on the northeast horizon, blue and gray and vast, she stopped her horse and looked at it. He stopped beside her. "There," she said. He looked. The territory was not close enough to see in detail, but it was there, the shape of the land she had come from, the specific ridgeline that she had grown up watching. He could see it in the way she sat in the saddle, the quality of her attention. This was not a landscape she was surveying, it was one she was greeting. "It has been 6 years," he said. "Yes." "Are you afraid?" "No," she said, then more honestly, "a little." "Me too," he said. She looked at him. "You are afraid." "Meeting your people," he said. "Of course I am. Your mother was a war chief." Something warm and complicated moved through her face. "My mother died 3 winters ago." He had not known that. "I'm sorry." "She would have been impossible about you," Sharamph said, and there was an entire world of complex love and grief and rueful humor in the way she said it. "She would have tested you within an inch of your life. She would have made you carry water for 3 days before she spoke to you directly." "I can carry water," he said. "I know." She looked at the horizon. "She would have respected you in the end. She respected people who could do things." A pause. "She respected people who were honest." "I'm honest," he said. "Aggressively so," she agreed. "It is occasionally inconvenient," but she said it the way she said things that she loved. He reached over and bumped her elbow with his. She shook her head at the horizon and moved her horse forward, and he moved with her, and they rode down into the valley together with the morning behind them, and whatever was ahead of them being exactly right. The Eastern Contract Camp was a smaller operation than Cairo. A mixed crew of miners and surveyors working a silver seam in the lower grayspines. with a competent foreman named Dath who shook Sharamph's hand when she arrived and nodded at Eli, with the assessment of a man who had already been told about the bridge and had drawn his own conclusions. The camp had a bunkhouse, a cookhouse, and a set of stables that were, by Eli's professional assessment, in acceptable condition if you were feeling generous and a modest disaster if you were being precise. The foreman gave him 3 days to bring them to standard before the new draft horses arrived, which Eli considered a reasonable deadline if slightly optimistic. He spent those 3 days repairing, mucking, rebedding, and reorganizing, and the physical work was deeply satisfying in the way that only work you are genuinely good at can be. The horses, when they arrived, stepped into the stalls with the particular equine confidence of animals who had been correctly prepared for. Sharamph spent the same 3 days conducting a preliminary survey of the face above the silver seam, returning each evening with charts and the specific quality of focused satisfaction that came from a mountain that had been honest with her about its structure. She came back on the second evening to find Eli sitting outside the reworked stables with 2 bowls of camp stew, and she sat down next to him and ate, and when the stew was done she put her head on his shoulder and did not say anything for a long time. "Good mountain," he said eventually. "Very honest mountain," she said. "Straightforward geology, no tricks. Sounds like a relief." After the graceful Western face, she said, "Yes." He put his arm around her. The camp was quiet in the late evening, the silver light of the mountains coming in horizontal over the valley. "Adrissa's offer," he said. "In the autumn," she said, "after the clan visit." After the clan visit, she was quiet a moment. "Eli, I want you to understand something about what I said before about being chosen." She sat up enough to look at him. "I am not asking you to build your life around mine. I am asking you to build it with mine. Those are different things." "I know," he said. "You have things you want," she said. "Things that matter to you, the horses, the work, a place that is yours." "Those things matter to me here," he said. "With you, that's not a compromise, Sharamph, that's just true." She studied him. She was always studying him, and he had come to know that the studying was not distrust. It was the way she processed the fact that he kept being consistently, persistently what he said he was, and she had not yet fully caught up with the idea that this was not going to stop. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said things that were facts about the mountain, direct, certain, stated for the record. He smiled. "I love you," he said. She leaned back into him. "Good," she said. "That is good." The mountains were dark above them and the stars were coming out and the camp was quiet and the horses were settling for the night, and everything was what it was supposed to be. The silver survey took most of the summer. It was good work, precise, interesting, the kind that asked things of Sharamph that she had not been asked to do before, which was the quality of work she liked best. Eli ran the camp stables and took on the additional task of training 3 young horses that the camp had bought as unbroken stock, which occupied his mornings and gave his evenings a pleasant, earned tiredness. The camp crew was a different temperature from Caro. There was still the background reality of what Sharamph was. You could not be who she was and move through the world invisibly, and Eli had stopped expecting that. But Dath ran a different kind of operation, and the men who had come to work a silver seam in a small camp had generally come because they wanted work and not politics, and after the first week, it settled into simple professional coexistence. There was one incident. In the 3rd week of July, a miner from the South Lowlands named Pell who made a comment at the cookhouse that had enough venom in it to need addressing. Eli addressed it. Quietly, directly, without raising his voice, in the manner that Sharamph had once told him she found most effective because it denied the other person the satisfaction of a raised temperature. Pell had nothing to say to a man who refused to be angry at him. He ate his supper and moved to the other end of the table. Sharamph heard about it from Dath, who told her with the tone of a man adding information to a record. She came to Eli in the stables that evening and told him she had heard, and she looked at him with the expression that was not gratitude. She had been clear from the beginning that gratitude was not what she felt, but was something more important than gratitude. It was recognition, the clear-eyed, full-weight acknowledgement of what a person is and does, in the specific way you can only give it to someone you know completely. "I know," he said, before she could find the words. She kissed him instead. He was thoroughly fine with that. They reached the Doomhammer clan territory on the 3rd day of September, when the aspens in the high passes had gone gold, and the mornings had a quality of cold that meant winter was behind them by 2 weeks rather than 2 months. The territory was a series of valleys and high passes in the northeast Grayspines, and the approach to the main winter camp was through a canyon that closed in around them with a deliberate, watchful quality that had nothing to do with the rock. Sharamph rode straight and easy, and her spine was fractionally more upright than it was anywhere else, which told him something. They were seen before they arrived. Eli knew this because the canyon had eyes. He could feel them the way he could feel a horse watching him from the corner of a dark stall. The eyes did not feel hostile exactly, but they did feel exacting. He kept his hands visible on the reins and his posture easy, and let Keth set the pace. The camp when they reached it was nothing like he had imagined, which meant he had imagined it poorly. It was substantial, not a temporary war camp, but a winter settlement that had been in this location for generations, judging by the permanence of its stone foundations and the depth of the paths worn between buildings. The structures were a mix. Large hides stretched over log frames for the outer sleeping areas, stone-built central halls with smoke holes, smaller structures for work and storage. Everything was efficient in the way of people who had learned a long time ago the exact minimum required to live well in very hard places. There were perhaps 40 people visible in the immediate camp, and more beyond in the outbuildings. They were mostly women, Eli noted. The Doomhammer clan ran on a matrilineal structure, which Sharamph had explained to him at some length over the summer. They were all large, all green-skinned, all watching him with the collective expressiveness of a group that had decided to make no expression yet. Sharamph dismounted. He dismounted. She took 2 paces into the camp and stood, and then an older woman came out of the central hall and walked toward them. The woman was perhaps 60, shorter than Sharamph, but with the same quality of absolute presence, her gray-streaked hair bound up in the same leather cord style, her face mapped with the particular lines of someone who had spent decades in high altitude and had found the experience invigorating rather than weathering. She wore a deep green leather overrobe and moved with the unhurried certainty of a person who had never in her life needed to move faster to get respect. Sharamph made a gesture with her right fist at her chest. "Aunt Mara." "Nephew's daughter," Mara said, which Eli knew was not a diminishment but a formal address. "You were expected before the aspen turned." Contract ran long. Long is good work. Mara looked at Eli. Her gaze was the color of aged amber and had the quality of a very precise instrument. "This is the man." "Yes," Sharamph said. "He is small," Mara observed. "He is not small," Sharamph said with the tone of someone correcting a fact. "He is human-sized." "They are small," Mara said pleasantly. Eli decided that the moment called for directness. He met Mara's eyes. "I understand I will need to earn my place here," he said. "I am prepared to do that." Mara regarded him for a long moment with the unhurried thoroughness of her niece examining rock formations. Then she said, "We will see," which in anyone else's voice might have been a dismissal, but in hers contained the very specific quality of a door left open. It was, Sharamph told him later, the best first response Mara had ever given anyone who came to the clan for the first time. He chose to take that as a promising sign. The 3 weeks at the clan camp were among the most demanding of Eli's life and among the best. He carried water on the 2nd day, because he had been told that was how you started with a Doomhammer woman, and he carried it without complaint or remark. He was given the task of managing the camp's 3 horses on the 3rd day, a task that was clearly a test, and one he met the way he met all horses, with patience and quiet confidence that communicated nothing defensive and everything capable. By the end of the first week, the horses liked him better than they liked most of the clan, which was both a professional achievement and apparently a specific cultural one. The clan tracked the behavior of their animals toward strangers as a formal method of character assessment. Sharamph told him this on the seventh night with the tone of someone who is very pleased, but does not want to be obvious about it. He sat with Mara on the eighth day while the old woman repaired a piece of harness and he repaired a piece of fence at the same time, and they worked in companionable silence for an hour before Mara said, without looking up, "She has been alone too long." "Yes," Eli said, "I know. She does not ask for things." "No," he said. "She states facts and hopes you are paying attention." He paused. "I have been paying attention." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Her mother would have tested you harder." "I know," he said. "Sharamph told me." "Her mother would have respected you also," Mara said. "Eventually." She looked at him then with the amber eyes that ran in this family like a river through a range. 3 days is not sufficient for water carrying with a Doomhammer woman who has been alone for 6 years. "How many days?" he said. 17, Mara said. He looked at her. "Is that a specific number?" "It is the number of days my husband carried water before I spoke to him directly," she said. "He outlived me in patience by 3 days. He had the better endurance." There was something in her voice when she said it, old and deep and completely alive. "That is what you look for," he nodded. "I understand." "I believe you do," she said, and went back to the harness. The stone marking was Sharamph's idea. On the last evening before they planned to leave for the return to Caro and Adrissa's offer, she came to him in the horse paddock as the sun was going down behind the western ridge. She was carrying her father's knife, which he had seen her carry every day without ever seeing her use it for anything since the marks. "There is something I want to do before we go," she said. "If you are willing." He looked at the knife. "What is it?" "Your mark," she said. "On the summit." "Your mark beside mine." She looked at the peak above the camp, which rose clean and definite against the evening sky, dusted at the top with early September snow. "We can go at first light. We will be back by midday." He looked at the summit. It was not a casual ascent, he could see that from here, but it was not beyond him. "You want me up there," he said. "I want your mark next to mine," she said. "On the stone where I put it 6 years ago. You do not carry this alone." She paused, "And neither do I any more." He took the knife from her hand and looked at it. The bone handle, the narrow, worn blade, the record of everything it meant. "First light," he said. They reached the summit in 4 hours of hard, cold climbing, and it was the hardest physical thing Eli had done since the year he broke 4 horses in a single month in the worst winter the market town had seen in a decade. The last section was scrambling on all fours over exposed rock that was ice cold under the palms and clear dropped on 3 sides. Sharamph reached back for him on the last step, taking his forearm in both hands, and pulled him up to the summit in one clean motion. He stood beside her. The world below was incomprehensible in the way the world only was from real altitude, impossibly vast, impossibly detailed, the valleys and passes and ranges running in every direction to the limits of sight. The clan camp was a tiny organized pattern directly below. The road south was a pale thread disappearing into the gray spines. The sky was the exact color of deep water and completely empty. She found her mark in the stone without looking by feel, her fingers going straight to it, 6 years of memory making the distance nothing. She knelt and he knelt beside her and she handed him the knife. "Next to mine," she said. He cut 2 marks the way she had shown him, matching hers, a line, then the angular sign. He was not as precise as she was, it was harder than it looked, but it was his and it was there, and when she put her fingers on both marks together they fit. She sat back on her heels and looked at them. Then she looked at him. He was breathing hard from the climb, and cold, and his palms were scraped from the final scramble. And he was, at this altitude with this woman looking at him like that and the whole world laid out below them both, entirely and completely happy. She took his face in both hands and kissed him, on the summit of the mountain, with the wind doing everything it had available to it and the sun on both their backs. When she let him go, she was smiling, the open, fully committed smile that he had been collecting since that first brief laugh in the first week, and every iteration of it was something he would carry a long time. 2 marks, she said. 2 marks, he agreed. She stood and helped him up, and they started down the mountain together, back toward the camp and the horses and the road south and Idris's offer, and whatever came next. They returned to Cairo in the 3rd week of September, with the first real frost already on the ground in the mornings, and the Grayspines preparing to lock themselves away for the winter in the manner of mountains that take this seriously. Idris was at the gate when they rode in, which Eli suspected was not accidental. "The survey," she said. "Filed with the board 2 weeks ago," Sharamph said. "The eastern seam is sound, and the silver yield is better than the preliminary report suggested. The horses," she said to Eli. "All 3 broken and one of them is exceptional," he said. "I've left the foreman a full management guide. The exceptional one is named Smoke and should not be sold under any circumstances." Idris nodded. "Good. Come inside." She paused. "Both of you." The offer Idris made them in her office was better than Eli had hoped for, and exactly what Sharamph had considered the bare minimum of sensible, which meant it was very good. Sharamph was offered the position of head survey specialist for the Cairo Camp Mountain operations, with full authority over all geological review and safety certification. She would work her own hours as the mountain required. She would report to Merk and Idris jointly, and to no one else. Eli was offered the position of head stable master and horse breaker for the expanded draft horse operation that Idris was building for the winter timber operation. He would have 2 assistants and full responsibility for all animal management in the camp. The salaries Idris named were fair and specific, and she named them without apology. Sharamph looked at Eli. He looked at her. "We accept," he said. "Together," she said. Idris looked at them with the expression of a practical woman who has arranged several things at once and is satisfied with the outcome. "Good. There is a larger structure at the edge of the stable compound. It was used as a hay storage. I have had it cleared and fitted with a stove and a proper floor." She paused. "It is suitable for 2 people." She stood. "Move in when you like." She walked out, and that was that. The structure at the edge of the stable compound was, in fact, much better than Idris had described. It had 3 rooms, a stone hearth, 2 good windows that faced the mountain, and a back door that opened directly onto the paddock. Eli stood in the middle of it the first evening they were there, and thought about the fact that he had slept on a cot in the stable for 2 years. Sharamph was standing in the doorway to the room that faced the mountain, looking at the view. He came and stood beside her. The Grayspines were doing what they did in the late afternoon light, going from gray to gold to deep purple, moving through it like a sequence of statements, each one more definitive than the last. The western face was visible from here, the repaired bridge footing a small but perceptible straightening of the line at the river. "I was right about the fissure," she said. "You were right about the fissure," he confirmed. "And about you," she said. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. Keth was visible in the paddock, standing in the good last light with the patience of a horse who has been fed and watered, and has decided that the rest of the day is purely philosophical. "I was right about you from the moment you walked up to Keth without flinching," she said. "The very first day," he said. "The very first day," she said. "I did not admit it to myself for several weeks, but yes," he laughed. She turned and looked at him with the open expression that was her equivalent of everything. "I was right from the axe," he said. "The axe," she said. "Nobody had ever nearly axed my foot before," he said. "It made an impression." She made the sound that was a laugh trying to stay dignified and failing, and he held her, and the mountains went purple beyond the window, and the paddock was quiet, and the camp moved around them in its evening rhythms, and it was home. It was exactly what that word meant when it was working properly. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and the fire in the hearth was warm, and the mountains were outside keeping watch the way mountains do when they have decided they approve of something. The winter came and the camp sealed itself in against it in the manner of places that have done this many times and know exactly how it goes. The passes closed. The timber runs moved to the shorter routes. The horses grew thick winter coats and were worked less and fed more. And Eli kept the stables so warm and well-maintained that Idris told him, without apparent irony, that the horses were the best-housed occupants of Caro Camp. The survey work moved indoors in the worst of the cold. Sharamph at the table in their rooms with maps spread out, and Eli across from her with the horse management records he was working through, both of them in the sphere of the same fire, and the silence between them was a very specific kind of full. She marked him again in November, a second mark beside the first, which in the Doomhammer tradition meant the choice had been considered and confirmed rather than made in heat. He made her his own mark in return, a simple E, carved with the same knife, smaller and less elegant than her clan mark, exactly his. The camp held a winter gathering at the end of November, a long evening in the main hall with the better cook having been given resources and an evening's ambition. Everyone came, the miners and the loggers and the surveyors and the horse crew and Merc, who brought a bottle of something ancient from the eastern passes that he had been apparently hoarding for an occasion, and Idris, who danced with a precision that suggested she had been trained at some point by someone who took it seriously. Sharamph sat beside Eli at the long table and watched the hall with the expression of someone for whom this was new and not unpleasant. Corvin, who was still with the camp and had arrived at a settled version of their acquaintance that was not warm but was genuine, raised his cup in her direction from across the table. She raised hers back. Eli watched this and felt something large and uncomplicated settle into place. The half-blood iron worker who had been quietly dismissed before Idris arrived had returned in October and was sitting 3 seats down. The goblin trader had come through the supply gate twice in the month since Dast's list had come down, and had been received with normal commercial courtesy both times. These were not dramatic victories. They were the small structural rebuilding that happened when the worst was removed, slow, imperfect, real. Sharamph leaned close to him at the table and said quietly, "I did not expect this. The winter gathering, any of it." She gestured slightly, indicating the hall, the camp, the general weight of where they had ended up. "I expected the survey contract. I expected to do the work and leave." She looked at him. "I did not expect to stay. Do you want to leave?" He said, though he already knew. "No," she said. "I want exactly this." He took her hand under the table. She held it. Outside, the grayspans were white and enormous under a sky full of stars, and the cold was absolute and magnificent. And inside the hall it was warm and loud and full of the specific, imperfect, ongoing life of people who had decided to be in the same place. And Eli Weston had a woman's hand in his, and a roof and work he was good at, and a mark on his forearm that meant something precise and real. And everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. He had been told, a long time ago when he first came to the mountains, by an old stable master in the valley market who had been breaking horses for 40 years, that the secret of the work was simple: be where the animal is. Not where you want it to be, not where it should be, where it is. Meet it there and it would meet you everywhere else. He had applied this advice to horses for his entire professional life. It turned out it worked for everything. Sharamph looked at him. "What are you thinking about?" "Horses," he said. She raised an eyebrow. They were at a winter feast with music and firelight and their hands linked under a table, and he was thinking about horses. "Specifically," he said, "I was thinking about how the best things in my life have come to me sideways while I was paying attention to something else." He paused. "I was paying attention to Keth." She was quiet for a moment. "Then Keth has always had good judgment." "He does," Eli agreed. "He saw you immediately." She looked at him with the full, open, settled expression that was her version of everything words could say, and then she leaned her shoulder into his, and he leaned back, and Mara's voice was somewhere in the back of his mind saying, "That is what you look for," and he had found it, and it was here, and it was staying. The fire was high and the hall was warm, and outside the mountains were keeping patient watch over all of it, the way mountains did, the way they had for longer than any of this. The camp, the people, the list that was down now, the bridge that was rebuilt, the two sets of marks cut into a summit stone that no one but the two of them would ever read. The music picked up. Someone in the back of the hall had produced a fiddle from somewhere, which led to two more fiddles appearing with the mysterious speed of fiddles at winter gatherings, and the tables were being pushed back. Sharamph looked at the dancing with an expression of careful neutrality. "Can you dance?" Eli said. "Clan dancing," she said. "It involves more stamping." "This involves some stamping," he said. "I'll teach you the rest." She looked at him. Then she stood, which was a decision in itself, and she pulled him up from the bench with one hand, and he was on his feet and laughing, and she was leading him toward the cleared floor, and the fiddles were going, and the hall was warm and loud, and it was everything, and it was theirs.